I walked out of my stepdad's house as my parents never supported me. Now my mom wants me back. Because my grandfather has stopped giving her money for my education. I'm a 20-year-old college student, and for the past 5 years, I've been living with my mom and stepdad. To say it's been tough would be an understatement. The atmosphere at home is always tense, especially when it comes to my relationship with my stepdad. He seems to find fault with everything I do, no matter how hard I try. Just last week, I had a study group session for a big project we're working on. We lost track of time, and I ended up getting home around 9 p.m. As soon as I walked through the door, my stepdad started yelling at me for being late. I tried to explain that we were working on an important assignment, but he wouldn't listen. He went on and on about how I was probably out partying and wasting time. It didn't matter that I had told my mom where I was going or that 9 p.m. isn't even that late for a college student. He just kept criticizing me until I retreated to my room. This isn't the only time he did so. A few months ago, I got my results back for a really challenging exam. I scored a B+, which I was pretty proud of considering how difficult the class was. When I showed my stepdad the grade, hoping for some encouragement or at least acknowledgement of my hard work, he just scoffed and said, "Is that the best you can do? You should be getting straight A's." It really hurt to have my achievement dismissed like that. I felt like nothing I did was ever good enough for him. Even simple things become a source of fight. Last summer, I got a part-time job at a local coffee shop. I thought my stepdad would be pleased that I was showing initiative and earning my own money. Instead, he complained that my work schedule was disrupting family dinners, which were rarely pleasant anyway, and that the job would distract me from my studies. I couldn't win no matter what I did. My mom isn't much help in these situations. She's always been more focused on her own life than on being a mother. When I was younger, she'd often forget important things like packing my lunch for school or signing permission slips for field trips. I remember having to fake her signature more than once, just so I wouldn't miss out on school activities. Now that I'm in college, she barely asks about my classes or how I'm doing. It's like I'm just a roommate to her, not her son. I guess I should give some background on how we ended up in this situation. My mom and dad split up when I was 15. Their marriage had been rocky for years, with constant arguments and tension in the house. My mom always had to have the last word in every fight, and she'd manipulate situations to make my dad look like the bad guy. I remember one particularly bad fight when I was about 12. My dad had forgotten to pick up some groceries my mom had asked for. Instead of just reminding him or going to get them herself, my mom turned it into a huge argument. She accused him of not caring about the family, of always putting his needs first. She brought up every little mistake he'd ever made and twisted them to make him sound like a terrible husband and father. I could see my dad getting more and more frustrated, trying to defend himself, but never getting a word in edgewise. Don't get me wrong, my dad wasn't perfect either. He had a temper and would sometimes say hurtful things in the heat of the moment. But looking back, I think my mom pushed him to his limits. She knew exactly which buttons to push to get a reaction out of him, and then she'd play the victim when he finally snapped. The night they told me they were getting divorced is still clear in my memory. My mom painted herself as the long-suffering wife who had tried everything to make the marriage work. She made it sound like my dad was abandoning us, even though I later found out she was the one who had filed for divorce. It was all part of her manipulation, making sure she came out looking like the good guy. After the divorce, my mom started dating my stepdad almost immediately. She met him at a local bar, and within 6 months they were married. It felt like she was trying to replace our family as quickly as possible. I never really got a chance to process the divorce before this new guy was suddenly living in our house and trying to parent me. The change was rough. My stepdad came in with his own ideas about how things should be done, and he wasn't interested in considering how his presence was affecting me. He implemented strict rules about curfews and chores, even though I had always been responsible about those things. It felt like he was looking for excuses to exert his authority over me. For the most part, I've kept quiet about how I feel. I don't want to cause more drama or make things worse. I've tried to focus on my studies and spend as much time as possible out of the house. But yesterday, something happened that was the final straw for me. I had a big exam coming up in my advanced calculus class. It's one of the hardest courses in my major, and I really needed to do well on this test. I had been studying all day, but I still felt like I needed more time to review some complex concepts. Around 11 p.m., I moved to the living room to study. My room is right next to my parents' bedroom, and the walls are thin. I didn't want to disturb them with my late-night studying, and the living room has always been a quiet place where I can concentrate. Around midnight, my stepdad came out of the bedroom. As soon as he saw me, he started complaining about the light being on. I calmly explained that I needed to study for my exam, but he insisted I go to my room. I tried to argue that the living room was the only quiet place in the house where I could study without disturbing anyone, but he wouldn't listen. That's when he exploded. He started yelling about how ungrateful I was, how I was wasting his electricity, and how I'd probably fail the exam anyway because I was too stupid to study efficiently. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been working so hard, and to have him dismiss my efforts and insult my intelligence like that was devastating. The commotion brought my mom out of the bedroom. I hoped that maybe, just this once, she would stand up for me. Instead, she just told me to do what my stepdad said and go to my room. She didn't even acknowledge how unfair and hurtful his words had been. It was like she didn't care at all about how I was feeling or how important this exam was to me. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to my room, but I didn't study. I couldn't focus after what had happened. Instead, I stayed up all night thinking about my situation. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't continue living in this toxic environment. As soon as I heard my mom and stepdad leave for work, I started packing. I grabbed a duffel bag and filled it with some clothes, my laptop, and a few personal items. I wrote a short note saying I needed some time away and left it on the kitchen table. Then, with a mix of fear and determination, I headed to my grandparents' house across town. They've always been supportive of me, and I hoped they would understand why I needed to get away. I'm writing this from their guest room now. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know I can't go back home right now. The relief I felt as soon as I walked out that door was overwhelming. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. I need some time to think and figure out what to do next, but for now, I'm just grateful to be out of that house and away from the constant criticism and tension. I know my mom will probably be upset when she realizes I'm gone, but I can't bring myself to care too much right now. I need to start prioritizing my own mental health and well-being. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know that this was a necessary step. I just hope my grandparents will understand and support my decision. Update 1. It's been a couple of days since I left home and came to stay with my grandparents. The peace and quiet here have been a complete contrast to the constant tension I was living with before. My phone has been blowing up with calls and messages from my mom, but I've only responded with short texts to let her know I'm safe. I'm not ready to have a full conversation with her yet. My stepdad hasn't reached out at all, which honestly doesn't surprise me. I doubt he even misses me. When I first arrived at my grandparents' house, they were surprised, but welcoming as always. My grandmother immediately started fussing over me, asking if I was hungry and insisting on making me a sandwich even though I said I was fine. My grandfather just gave me a long look, like he could sense something was wrong, but he didn't push me to explain. I'm not great at opening up about my feelings, and I appreciated that they didn't force me to talk about why I was there. I've been staying in their guest room, which is more comfortable than my room at home ever was. There's a calmness here that I'd forgotten could exist in a household. No one's yelling or slamming doors or making mean comments. It's just peaceful. Yesterday, my mom came to visit. I guess she finally got tired of me not responding to her messages. She tried to convince me to come home, saying things like, "We miss you," and "Your stepdad is worried about you." I knew that last part wasn't true. If anything, he's probably happy to have me out of the house. I told her I needed some time away and that I wanted to spend time with my grandparents. She didn't look happy, but she didn't push too hard either. I think she could tell I wasn't going to budge. My grandfather has been amazing through all of this. He's always been there for me even when my own parents weren't. I remember when I was little, he'd take me fishing every weekend. He taught me how to bait a hook and cast a line, always patient even when I got frustrated and tangled my line for the 100th time. He'd tell me stories about when he was young, and we'd talk about everything and nothing as we waited for the fish to bite. As I got older, our fishing trips became less frequent, but our bond stayed strong. When I started getting interested in computers, he bought me my first programming book. He didn't understand much about coding himself, but he'd sit with me for hours as I excitedly explained what I was learning. His enthusiasm and support meant the world to me. When I started college, it was my grandfather who stepped up to help with my education. My stepdad had refused to contribute, claiming he couldn't afford it because of his income problems. But I knew he always had money for his golf club membership and new gadgets. It was just another way of showing how little he cared about my future. My grandfather, without hesitation, offered to pay for my tuition and expenses. He didn't just pay the bills, though. He took an active interest in my studies. He'd ask about my classes, help me brainstorm for essays, and even tried to learn some basic coding so he could understand what I was studying in my computer science classes. I remember one time, I was struggling with a particularly difficult programming assignment. I was ready to give up, feeling like maybe I wasn't cut out for this field after all. My grandfather sat down with me, and even though he didn't understand the technical details, he helped me break the problem down into smaller parts. He reminded me of how we used to approach fishing: patience, persistence, and taking things one step at a time. With his encouragement, I was able to finish the assignment and even got praise from my professor for my innovative approach. My grandmother has been great too. She's always making sure I'm eating enough and asking if I need anything. It's a contrast to how things were at home, where I often felt invisible. Here, I feel seen and cared for in a way I haven't in years. This morning, when I was in the guest room, working on some homework, I overheard my grandfather on the phone. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but then I realized he was talking to my mom. His voice was stern, which is rare for him. I couldn't make out everything he said, but I clearly heard him say, "I won't be sending you any more money. The boy will stay here with us." After he hung up, my grandfather came to find me. He didn't mention the phone call, just asked if I wanted to go fishing this weekend like old times. I said yes, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety about what might happen next. I'm not sure what to make of this situation. Part of me feels guilty, like I've caused problems between my mom and my grandparents. But another part of me feels relieved, like maybe someone is finally seeing the truth of what's been going on at home. For now, I'm just trying to take things one day at a time. Being here with my grandparents feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I can focus on my studies without constant criticism or tension. I'm sleeping better than I have in years, and I even feel more motivated in my classes. But I know this situation can't last forever. Eventually, I'll have to face my mom and stepdad and figure out what the future looks like. Will I go back home? Can I find a way to live on my own? What will happen with my college tuition? These questions keep swirling in my mind, but I'm trying not to let them overwhelm me. For now, I'm grateful for this relief and for the unconditional love and support of my grandparents. It's helping me realize what a healthy family dynamic should look like, and it's giving me strength to face whatever comes next. I know there are tough conversations and decisions ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I might be able to handle them. I'm not alone anymore, and that makes all the difference. Update 2. It's now been a few weeks since I moved in with my grandparents, and things have finally settled into a new normal. The peace and quiet here have been incredible for my studies. Without the constant stress and arguments at home, I've been able to focus better than I have in years. My grades are already improving, and I'm actually enjoying my classes again. It's amazing how much easier it is to learn when you're not constantly walking on eggshells or dreading going home. My grandparents have been amazing, but they've also been concerned. They had been asking every other day why I really left home, sensing there was more to the story than I was telling. At first, I kept brushing off their questions, not wanting to cause any family drama. I've always been the type to keep my problems to myself, not wanting to burden others. But 2 nights ago, everything came out. And it was after that night that my grandfather called my mom and shocked her with his decision. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. My grandmother had made my favorite meal, and there was a comfort in the air that made me feel safe. My grandfather gently asked again what had been going on at home. Maybe it was the calm atmosphere, or maybe I was just tired of keeping it all inside, but I finally opened up. I started talking, and once I began, it was like a dam had broken. I told them everything: the constant criticism from my stepdad, the neglect from my mom, the tension that filled the house every day. I explained how my stepdad would belittle my achievements and make me feel worthless. I told them about the night I left, how I wasn't even allowed to study in peace for an important exam. As I talked, I saw my grandfather's expression change from concern to anger. My grandmother reached out and held my hand, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, I felt like someone was really hearing me, really understanding what I had been going through. When I finished, my grandfather asked if my mom had been taking care of me properly, if my education fees were being paid regularly, if my needs were being met. He explained that he had been sending my mom money every month specifically for my care and education. Sometimes, he said, she even asked for more, claiming I needed it for school expenses. I was stunned. I had no idea my grandfather had been sending extra money for me. It was like a piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving suddenly fell into place. I told him the truth, that my needs weren't always met, that I often had to make do with old textbooks or skip social events because I couldn't afford them. I explained how my mom seemed to spend most of her money on herself and my stepdad, buying new clothes or going out to expensive restaurants. As I spoke, I could see the realization dawning on my grandparents' faces. They had been trying to help me all along, but their support had been misused. My grandfather's face turned red with anger, not at me, but at the situation. The next morning, he called my mom and told her that he wouldn't be sending any more money and that I would be staying with them. My grandfather's voice was firm and resolute. For the first time, I felt like someone was standing up for me. The next day of that, my mom showed up at my grandparents' house. She was upset, demanding to know why they were cutting her off and insisting that I needed to come home. My grandfather stood firm. He told her that the money had been for my care, not for her to spend as she pleased. He said I would be staying with them where they could ensure I was properly cared for and supported in my education. My mom tried to argue, bringing up how she had raised me and how I belonged at home with her. But my grandfather wasn't buying it. He calmly listed all the ways she had failed to provide for me, from the neglect I had experienced to the misuse of the money he had been sending. My grandmother, usually the quieter one, spoke up too. She told my mom how disappointed she was, not just in how I had been treated, but in the person my mom had become. As I listened to this confrontation from the other room, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for causing this rift in the family, but another part felt relieved, even vindicated. For years I had doubted myself, wondering if I was just being too sensitive or if I was the problem. Hearing my grandparents stand up for me made me realize that my feelings were valid. My mom tried to appeal to me directly, calling me to come out and talk to her. When I did, she put on a show of tears and pleading. She said she loved me and wanted me home, but for the first time, I stood my ground. I told her that I needed time and space, that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I saw a flash of anger in her eyes before she covered it with more tears. It was a glimpse of the manipulation I had grown up with, and it strengthened my resolve to stay where I was. After my mom left, my grandparents and I had a long talk. They apologized for not seeing what was happening sooner and promised to support me however they could. We made plans for me to continue living with them, at least until I finished college. They even offered to help me find a therapist to talk through some of the issues I've been dealing with. It's been a few days since then, and I'm still processing everything that's happened. I'm staying with my grandparents for now. They've offered to support me through college, and I've accepted. It's not just about the money. It's about having a stable, supportive environment where I can thrive. I'm focusing on my studies and on healing from the stress of the past few years. My grades are improving, and I'm even starting to enjoy my classes again. I've joined a study group and am making new friends who share my interests. It's amazing how much easier it is to connect with people when you're not constantly stressed and anxious. I'm not sure what the future holds for my relationship with my mom and stepdad. Part of me hopes that this wake-up call might change things, that maybe they'll realize how their behavior has affected me. But I'm also learning to set boundaries and prioritize my own well-being. I've decided to limit contact with them for now, giving myself time and space to heal. My stepdad still hasn't reached out to me, which honestly just confirms that I made the right decision in leaving. My mom has sent a few messages, alternating between guilt-tripping and making promises to change. I'm responding minimally, just enough to let her know I'm okay. I'm not ready for more than that right now. I've started seeing a therapist, as my grandparents suggested. It's early days, but already I'm learning a lot about myself and how to process the emotions I've been bottling up for years. I'm beginning to understand that the way I was treated wasn't normal or okay, and that I deserve better. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. I'm grateful beyond words for my grandparents and the love and support they've shown me. They've taught me what family should really be like, and that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I know there will be challenges ahead. Healing takes time, and I'm sure there will be difficult moments as I navigate my new reality. But for the first time in years, I feel hopeful about the future. I'm learning to trust myself, to value my own worth, and to surround myself with people who genuinely care about me. This experience has been a turning point in my life. It's shown me that it's okay to stand up for myself, to remove myself from toxic situations, and to seek help when I need it. I'm not the same person I was when I first packed my bags and left home. I'm stronger now, more self-aware, and determined to build a life that makes me happy. As I sit here in my grandparents' house working on an essay for class, I feel a sense of peace I haven't known in years. I know the road ahead might not be easy, but I'm ready to face it. I'm not alone anymore, and that makes all the difference.